Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today we have Dr. Amarjit Singh with us. Dr. Singh, for the past 33 years, has led the Sikh diaspora in speaking out against injustices that Sikhs in India face. And along with that, he's also been a voice for a lot of minorities that have faced oppression within the Indian subcontinent. Along with that, Dr. Singh provides a great source of knowledge and rich historical context to any conversation that has happened in the past. So today we'll be speaking with Dr. Singh about the current ongoing farmers' protest and the role of the media and the democratic processes within those protests. So, Dr. Singh, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session.
Thank you. No, thank you for coming out. So, as you know, the farmers' protests have been going on since November 26th. And, and even before that, when these ordinances were passed in September, but they were introduced in June. So, as we can see how in the initial stages of the farmers' protests, that they were faced with a lot of obstacles, especially from the police and authorities. So can you touch on about how the decay of democratic processes led to this and provide a bit historical background on this?
I think when we talk about democracy, the definition given by Abraham Lincoln comes to mind, where he said, of the people, by the people, for the people. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in India, which in the post 15th August 1947 chose democracy or adult vote and franchise for everybody as the basis for their system. Right. But if we may look at the working of that, and by 2014, when Modi government came into being, and if we may look at even his background, that Modi and his Home Minister today, Amit Shah, they were Chief Minister and Home Minister way back in 2002 in state of Gujarat, when thousands of Muslims were cold-bloodedly murdered, and from there Modi got the title from majoritarian population as Hindu Hirday Samrat, meaning that king of the Hindu hearts. So the 2014 Modi government's very slogan was what had been of RSS for 100 years since 1920s, Hindu, Hindi, Hindustan. So if we may say that thou majoritarianism and that got converted into Hindutva or Hindutva ideology, and we may look at from 2014 until now their policies, particularly towards minorities. We have seen that how the legitimate constitutional status of Kashmir was not only finished or abrogated, but even they broke Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, breaking away its status of a state as well. Then CAA Act and the others which are waiting, National Population Register and all. So similarly, regarding that, how when we look at their connection with the Adanis and Ambanis, we know that all the policies in these years, they may be GST, which was that they took away that right from the states to tax their people, and they said that we will put it and we'll give you back, and 50% of that will be given back. And 7 chief ministers, they have complained that they haven't gotten the money for the last 2-3 years. Similarly, we see that they came up with Notebandi, that no more currency, new currency, people were told to bring their old notes, and how miserably that had failed. Then we look at that how they may be Nirav Modi, he may be Vijay Malaya, and how all these big Gujarati traders, he fled with the money of the taxpayer. Some are sitting in UK, some at other places. So this is a pattern to it. And similarly, unfortunately, as the 80% of there are more than 600 TV channels in India, but 80% of them are owned by Adanis and Ambanis. So the very situation in India, what I am looking at is that reminds me of Nazi Germany of early 1930s.
So very
That
repetitive and stuff.
yes, absolutely. That how propaganda, which is a German language word, was used to brainwash people. How they had their militia kind of Nazi brown shirt people, those who were harassing people, as their RSS gundas, and you may look at this cow worship and cow vigilantes and love jihad and anti-conversion laws. Similarly, on that pattern. So I think in the name of democracy, actually, as Churchill, when he spoke in the House of Lords, when the the act which gave freedom to India and Pakistan was being Freedom of India Act was being discussed, that you will be, and Mr. Attlee was the prime minister at that time, and he said, Mr. Attlee, you are handing over the reins of government in the hands of rascals, rogues, and freebooters. And when we are seeing today, it is the same situation. It is a more of a gundacracy or a gooncracy rather than a democracy. But majoritarianism, now they have absolute majority in parliament, in upper house they managed majority.
And they can pass these. I mean,
Oh
seems
yeah, yeah.
like, you know,
Most of the states are being ruled by BJP now. So I don't see that there is any hope. Though this is a very serious challenge for them in the past 6 years. Nobody has challenged them that effectively as this farmer agitation to a level it has reached. But what I am seeing is that they are waiting for Republic Day, January 26th. They are using Supreme Court. Firstly, they used it as a shield. In the coming days, they'll use it as a sword to disperse those people, to make them go away from there. They have already started sending notices to many journalists and commoners and even TV channels, those who are covering it under the NIA, National Investigative Agency. And we have seen the period of 80s and 90s, and certainly a very black law like UAPA, under which they can claim, they can label anybody as a terrorist. I think the state will use its might and force very indiscriminately, and certainly they will try to destroy the movement by using the force.
So the three ordinances is kind of like on the similar pattern. You know, we saw Kashmir, we saw CEA, the discriminatory acts, right? And even this, you know, I saw that Sardar Singh comes out and says, oh, look, you know, a democratic process was not followed. There was never a discussion that happened with the center to let's talk about these laws and ordinances and how these benefit or whether these even do benefit. So there's a obvious a decay of democracy. There was not a democracy process was not followed. So what comes out of this? It's been a lot of days that, you know, these guys are protesting, farmers are protesting. Seems like the center does not want to talk about this. You know, we've seen a lot of meetings, you know, ended up in failures. So what does the future look like?
I think this process of so-called meetings is a delay tactic. They are just passing time. They are trying to see that where the cracks develop in the movement. They are wearing them out in this chilling cold. They are sitting there.
And they tried a lot,
At the
right?
same time, they are using negative propaganda, sometimes blaming Kharstanis, Naxals, or anti-social elements infiltrating in the movement. And they are waiting for an appropriate time to strike directly on them. And they are already using other harassing tactics. So when they abolished the status of Kashmir, they said ये तो कश्मीरियों के भले के लिए है, हम आपका भला कर रहे हैं. When they came up with GST, they said, oh, हम व्यापारियों का भला कर रहे हैं. Now they came up with these 3 acts. They say, oh, farmers don't know. They haven't read these bills. Actually, they are for the benefit of them. Now those who are suffering, they say, we don't want this pala. Keep it to yourself. But I think that is what is the propaganda means, that you keep on repeating a lie 100 times and people start believing that they may be true, and they have more resources, they have media, even on social media, their IT cell is very active, they are hiring people on day-to-day basis, and whoever speaks for the farmers, the trollers go after them. And you look at, and even look at Facebook, how they have behaved there. that lady who had to resign there, she was pushing the posts of Bajrang Dal and others, and how many pages of even those who are putting news regarding farmers' protests has been blocked on the Facebook. So I think they are using the same tactics which were used by Nazi Germany in 1930s. How much they will succeed, I don't know. But certainly, as regarding the Nazi Germany period, the guilt which later on the whole Europe and America felt that why we didn't do something before,
Yeah.
I think this is the time the world should speak. We are glad that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau raised his voice. 100 members of parliament in UK, they have raised their voice. In United States, US Congressional Sikh Caucus, their senior members and Congressman John Garamendi, they have spoken. 2 members of parliament of Australian parliament have spoken, and so do many other. That is a positive thing, but we are expecting that much more needs to be done from the international community. Otherwise, my fear is, and God may not do it, that there may be another genocide of the Sikhs, the way these RSS goons, they are behaving.
And what do you think about the response? These farmers have come out said कि "Janta hi वापस लो वो जानता सी मरांगे," है ना? That sort of a narrative. And some people are saying and playing the devil's advocate. Look, there should be a discussion that should be happening. You just can't ask for the repeals of these 3 laws. We can make changes. What do you think about the response from the farmers and the unions and stuff?
I think when we look around, and I being a student of history and looking at it, or 10,000 years of human history, when movements have leaders or a leader, they know with whom they are dealing. Leader knows how to take people along with, how to cross obstacles. But what is happening in the farmers' movement? Farmers are the leaders. There is no, though there are 40 organizations and all, it's a kind of Arab Spring. And with the mobs, when they are in the lead, there is enthusiasm, no doubt. There is a kind of defiance we see. But without proper leadership and without look at with which enemy, they are very simplistic minded, honest people believing in God, not having the convoluted mind of as the rulers have, those who have the backing of their security agencies, their big brains, they are sitting, they are seeing the scenes from where they can break this whole thing. In that, I am a little bit afraid that eventually they are putting former leadership into defensive when they say, oh, we are not Khalistanis. Now, somebody is Khalistani or not, that don't matters here. Even if those who are Khalistanis, they are not asking for Khalistan there. They are asking for, as Khalistanis are also farmers. And majority of the people there, they are coming from all walks of life. They may be leftists, they may be believers, they may be non-believers. But when they are targeting one thing, they are trying to hit 2 targets with 1 stone. On one hand, they are telling the rest of the majority, look at, these are Khalistanis. And on the other hand, to the Sikhs, they are putting a kind of discord amongst them that we are accusing each other. How you can say कि जी जकारा नहीं होएगा, how you can say केसरी चंडा नहीं होएगा. So in that they are buying time, and I am not sure, and I think the former leadership, those who are not letting others even come near that's not a wise thing. Now, though the slogan is करो या मरो, जहाँ जितांगे जहाँ शहीद होवांगे, but शहीद होना तो मकसद नहीं है. When we even look at the 10वें पातशाह's फरमान, first is निश्चय कर अपनी जीत करो. अत ही रण में तब जूझ मरो is the final when there is no. Firstly, our strategy should be how we are to win this battle. And for that, we have to take all along with us, so that we should know the different weapons of the enemy. We should know how they have used these weapons to crush the popular people upsurge in 1980s, how they have crushed the Kashmiri people, those who had been fighting and those who had been asking for right of self-determination. So I think somewhere this lack I am seeing, and how much enthusiasm this mob, this gathering will be able to keep in the coming time. Uh, on that also depend, but I think there somewhere there is a leadership crisis in it.
Yeah. Well, I know you talked about how certain groups are being demonized for the government to use stall tactics. I mean, if we look back summer in the United States, we had BLM protests, where they had a genuine concern that they brought up and they peacefully protested. We see laws being changed in cities, right? There's an outcome from it. And that speaks to the United States system, how it recognizes its citizens' problems and issues and they address it. With India, I think it's more towards of a fascist trend where you're kind of ignoring the minority. There's no for the people or by the people for the people process. So with this ongoing trend that we're seeing in India, as you mentioned earlier in 2002, Modi's background, I mean, even if we go back to 1947, can you shed some light upon democratic processes that were, ignored in terms of not only Sikhs as well, but other minorities in India that have kind of faced a similar challenge?
Unfortunately, in United States, as you mentioned about Black Lives Matter, look at this time the right winger and Ku Klux Klan's new reincarnation. They may be Proud Boys or those may be other groups, and how this society, which is the oldest democracy and based on very sound foundations by our founding fathers, how the society is polarized here. Yeah. And as we are talking, how scary we are at the way things are happening, as counter to Black Lives Matter, how the other narrative was built, and how even President Trump was able to take 8-9 million voters alongside him, whose whole campaign was based on this separation
fear mongering, calling them Antifa soldiers.
And I think in India as well, on one hand, we are glad and happy that with this farmers' challenge to the Delhi's might has brought the best out of whatever the Sikhism stands for. That is, the others have started joining us as farmers from Haryana, from Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, and even liberal-minded Hindus, those who think that this Hindutva ideology is a will doom India itself. They are Indian nationalists, but not the Hindutva nationalists. But the way recklessly they have used the state power in the last 6 years, and with the media on their side, and no international restraint on them. There was a time when I decided to come in the 80s in the United States. That was the time United States was the champion of human rights. Absolutely. And I was seeing what was happening to my people in Punjab. There were two options before me, either to stand here and die or get out and tell the world what is happening to my people. I chose the other thing, and that was the time when we could see that how America, and there was a big, in the political arena, US Congress thing was that developmental aid to any country should be linked with its human rights record. And that was the time when in the late 90s we see USCIRF, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, came into being, and then the annual reports on religious freedom, on human rights by State Department, by USCIRF, they were a criteria for that. And we look at how they have dealt through these reports with Cuba, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with North Korea.
Serious designations
Syria
of
and
these
China,
offenders.
even China. But unfortunately, these things started getting changed when they took this human rights thing away, when they established their relationship with China. And now in India's context, we are seeing that when President Trump was dining with Modi, hundreds of Muslims were being butchered in Delhi. And before that, when he was in Ahmedabad, thousands were sitting there on the protests and not a single word from Trump administration. So I think this international change on this human rights issue or democratic values, and within even America, what we are watching and seeing, and what happened on Capitol Hill, in the last days, that has given more encouragement, or if I may say that their dandy, their gunda behavior has been reinforced by what is happening in our country here, our adopted country. And I'm fearing that if tomorrow they even decide to strike heavily with all the brutality, I don't see, other than though I mentioned that the voice has been raised, but until unless there is no centralized policy here or at the UN, already UN has become a toothless,
Yeah.
gutless, and
Feeble.
boneless organization. So I fear that worst may come there.
You're right. I think the growing trend of fascism has kind of curbed, and we want to call it capitalism, whatever it is, privatization of industries and
Money,
economies,
greed.
money, greed. Yeah, these have pushed the human rights agenda on the back burner, and that's kind of given the rise of fascism, even through South Asia, Southeast Asia. We've seen this trend grow day by day. Speaking on that, I think it's important that we also acknowledge that the peaceful measures that these protesters have taken to ensure that their voices have heard. But the media being pocketed by certain stakeholders in the privatization of this industry have pocketed the media and changed the whole narrative. How, as being a media personality, like how important is it to control that narrative and telling the world the story that it is?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, social media has played a very positive role. If whatever is happening on the 5, 6 borders of Delhi, social media, and I'll appreciate even our Punjabi media, Punjabi channels from Punjab and even abroad, like Sikh channel, Akal channel, TV 84 team is also there on the ground. They have brought the truth out. Long term, I think the way media is being controlled, still our social media reach maybe to 10 or 15% people, particularly in the diaspora. Still 70-80% people there, their source of information is through the so-called mainstream media, which is playing in the hands of the Adanis and Ambanis, as it's owned by them. This is a serious challenge. But I appreciate that in India, particularly amongst the civil society, when we are seeing different voices being raised, when we are seeing different people from different backgrounds coming together. And certainly, one thing we should remember, as we are believers, we are believers in God, and we always believe that ultimately, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਰੱਬ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇਰ ਹੈ ਹਨੇਰ ਨਹੀਂ. If Hitler or Mussolini and all, they did whatever they wanted to do, but eventually they ended. And not only that, physically they were destroyed eventually. Today, nobody wants to associate with the legacy of them. Though today, when we are talking about rise of fascism or Nazism or Hindutva ideology in a different fashion, eventually, I believe in the nobility of the and the very defiance of the humankind as well. Now Sikhs have become a kind of front-ranking person who has stood up in front of that Delhi's tyranny, and the others are piling up behind him. And eventually, I think the way gurus have taught us that Sach sunaye si sach ki bela. That is what it means to be a Sikh. That Sikh is to stand for truth and sacrifice one's life for truth. And that lesson of Sikhism is being, I think, though slowly but certainly being learnt by other minorities, other oppressed people, and other justice people living in Indian map.
As they say, the truth will set you free. So I think this time around, we absolutely need true reporting, stuff from the ground. Gurreed, you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think Dr. Saab covered it pretty well in terms of what's the future looking like in when India is not respecting, calling itself the largest democracy but not respecting the overall goodness of the minorities, right? So and several, I mean, with the BJP government, we've seen sort of a very fast track push of getting things done, right? It seems like they came out with an agenda. We saw Kashmir, CEA, now these things. I think they got a lot to cover, and let's hope, like, just like in the U.S., Trump losing, maybe hopefully that sends a trend around the world that, look, I know that BJP was fearful of their seats and their vote back in Punjab, and they wanted to re-strategize. Hopefully, BJP and these guys reconsider their strategies, that long
And
term
I
these things
think
are harmful.
one thing I like to add that interestingly, in this context, even the so-called mainstream parties of Punjab, that may be Congress, Akali Dal, Badal, and Aam Aadmi Party, they have become virtually irrelevant, as the way this movement, the turn it is taking going forward. I am looking, maybe, as I said earlier, there is no leader of this movement, but sometimes in history we have seen that situations throw a leader, and we are hoping that in the coming time this farmers movement won't just be stuck with these three form acts agitation. More will come out of it, and the goodwill I am seeing, even look at that, how much hostility the rulers or this Hindutva ideology tried to create between the Sikhs and Muslims. But when they did away with the Kashmir status and Kashmiri students were being harassed throughout India, Sikhs came to their defense. They made sure Kashmiri daughters, Kashmiri sons they are given a safe passage to their homes, and that created goodwill in Kashmir. And not only Kashmir, amongst the Islamic world. And today, when Sikh farmers in the lead, they are there. Look at the songs coming from West Punjab in support of that, and how all of a sudden a goodwill amongst the other side. And we shouldn't forget that here in our Punjab, our population is 30 million. Pakistani Punjab's population is 120 million, and the goodwill. So I am seeing that lot of, and the hatred of 47 era, the hatred which was created by them between these communities, that is washed away, and they are loving. Similarly, even when people from Haryana, Rajasthan, and other places, those who have been brainwashed by this propaganda that every Sikh is a terrorist, Atankvadi, Algavwadi, they are coming, they are seeing langar, they are seeing where everybody without any discrimination of caste, color, creed, gender, eating together. For those so-called untouchables of that part of the world, which high caste people don't even allow them to pass through their streets in front of their homes. This all is the beauty of the thing, and I think rest is Guru's kala. When we say kala, the miracle, this is the miracle of the Guru, that in spite of all odds, there was a time 10 years ago, we saw that how Punjab is now. They came up with a film like Udta Punjab, that drugs and 60% boys, 40% girls are drug addicts, nothing in Punjab, no Sikh left. All that was not untrue, but look at all of a sudden that youth, that all, how much energy. And I was looking at one Arya Smaji saying, he was saying, मैं यहाँ बहुत ऊर्जा देख रहा हूँ, ऊर्जा is energy. That the whole environment is full of energy, and they are seeing that we try to give depression to them, made them druggy. ये ऊर्जा कहाँ से आ गई? So this is what is the strength of the Sikhi, which is the blessing of the Gurus on that land, as one philosopher poet of 20th century, Professor Puran Singh, has said, Punjab na Hindu na Musalman, Punjab jiunda Guran de naate. So this is the blessing of Baba Guru Nanak Sahib on
Absolutely.
that land.
No, I mean, even though things might look bleak on the ground, that there's no progress, there's stall tactics, but we have support from the diaspora, we have support from other external actors. And like, Dr. Singh mentioned that the political parties in Punjab are losing their grip. So we're seeing a new form where people, a true democracy, which they're forcing through this protest, where people are getting the power that they truly hold and making their voices heard. So thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for joining us.
My pleasure. And certainly this is a very good effort. And let we hope that in the coming time when we'll meet, we'll talk more positive with talking about some victories as well.
Yes.
At this time, it is uncertainty, certainly, but our faith in the Guru Almighty and the way our people they have come out that tells that we'll write a new course of history in that part of the world in the subcontinent.
Absolutely. Good for your last thoughts.
Last thoughts? No, I think Dr. Singh wrapped it up well. So no,
All
no
right.
last thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let us know what other topics you'd want to cover, and be on the lookout for more podcasts in the future on interesting topics. So until then, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki
Fateh.
Fateh.